Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is a piece of work or a piece of research, a thread of research almost, as Audrey calls it, that's been part of my research agenda for many years now. In fact, the research I'm about to present to you now, and this is ongoing as part of a project that's funded by the EPSRC, and which is why I have the logo there. But it started almost 10 years ago, or a little more than 10 years ago now. At that point, it was a BP-funded project and was about modeling urban energy systems. And in that project, I developed the first version of our own activity-based and agent-based energy demand model. And since then, at an early stage, what it was basically a model that could predict activity and travel patterns of every individual in a population. So if we model for London, then we have a synthetic population that is representative of the true population for London. And for every individual in London, we would simulate through econometric models their activity and travel patterns. And then there was a simple translation of the activity and travel patterns and where they performed into energy consumption or energy demand. So that was early versions. Now, what we're doing now is considering the fact that energy, much like travel or transport, is a derived demand. And there are decisions we make where parameters of energy, whether that's energy pricing, the availability of charging for an electric vehicle. So any parameter related to energy provision is in many ways closely related to the decisions that people make and their activity travel patterns. And so it's not as though what people do is exogenous to the energy consumption, but actually the whole thing is part and parcel of a bigger picture of what people do and how that relates to the pricing of energy, the availability of charging services, and so on. So that's the background of this project that I'm talking about, which is called the IDLES project, or the Integrated Development of Low Carbon Energy Systems. So it's a very large, it's a program grant actually rather than a project. There are many projects within it. One of those projects is the one that I'm working on, which is developing an agent-based microsimulation implementation of an activity-based model of energy demand. The idea here is that, as I mentioned already, demand is indirectly derived from the need to participate in activities. And in this implementation, we want demand to be predicted at the level of the individual consumer so that we capture the heterogeneity in terms of behavioral preferences, lifestyle preferences, adoption patterns of electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, etc., so that we can incorporate the heterogeneity in those behaviors into the demand prediction for energy. Also, so that the demand vectors that we're predicting are highly disaggregate spatio-temporally, and we can predict it. Now we're getting more and more ambitious, as you can hear. We can predict it both strategically, so we can predict what demand would look like, energy demand would look like a week from now, a month next year, same time, that kind of thing strategically, but also tactically. How is demand likely to change if suddenly we tell everyone that tomorrow there's going to be a strong a high probability of wind-driven energy between 12 and 4 p.m. So if we can take advantage of that, and if you have a lot of local generation, if you can provide that kind of information, can you predict how people will respond to that, not just in terms of whether they take advantage of that renewable energy, but also in terms of their activity patterns and what they do and where they do it and so on. So that's the level of ambition. At this point, it's primarily a strategic model. The tactical aspect of it is something we're still working on because the two are closely linked, but they're very different when it comes to prediction. So then we also want, another big thing we want in this platform is that we want to take advantage of the emerging data sources and combine it with emerging big data sources, but also combine it with smaller data sets that are rich, very rich in terms of their ability to analyze or provide information about how people make decisions and what drives those decisions and so on. So we want to try and combine the value of both into such a platform. And finally, the aim of this model is to support analysis and development of more decentralized control and incentivization methods. Some examples of use cases that we want the platform to be able to address from a more mobility-oriented perspective, given that I sit in the Center for Transport Studies, is that we want to be able to analyze the impact of new business models that relate to energy consumption, such as peer-to-peer trading. We also want to look at the impact of virtual activities, e-shopping and related logistics, emerging modes of transport, such as shared e-bikes and shared e-cars and e-scooters, and generally the adoption of electric vehicles and the possibility of vehicle to grid or vehicle to home sort of energy transfer services. So these are the kind of use cases that we want our models to be sensitive to. Why is this important? Because then we need to make sure that the econometric and statistical models that drive our simulation has the kind of variables that can address these use cases and therefore be sensitive to such policies. Now, what does the model itself look like? Conceptually, these are all the bits and pieces we want to model. We have the system being a subset of a variety of agents, individuals, businesses, as well as different sectors. There's the housing sector, the transport sector, and industry as a whole. We want to be able to model the relationships between them and the overall environment with a very functional focus. At this point, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I think this is sufficient. What might be useful is the simulator that we're developing. This is an activity-based energy demand simulator, still in development. So I'm going to give you a few indications of what specific models in here that are being developed. So what I've numbered in here is model 1 and model 2 are the ones I'm going to give you a quick insight on. But overall, what this is we want to be able to, on the one hand, I don't know if my marker will work. It does. On the one hand, on the left-hand side, you see the various data sources, census data, time use survey data, smaller data sets. For example, we use the project meter data from Oxford, which is very rich. It's a good example of data that's small but very rich in terms of energy consumption, how it's driven by individuals, activities, their appliances, and what they're doing at that moment, and so on. So using a wide range of data sources, using as input the population, the context, and the energy policy. And there are models that are calibrated that feed into the activity synthesizer and the demand simulator. The population synthesizer at the moment is a very simple population synthesizer that we're using. So it is a representative population from a data set such as the London Travel Demand Survey or the UK National Travel Survey. So representative population that is used along with its weights as a seed, basically. But the plan is to develop our own synthetic population generator that can produce a population that is as closely representative as possible of the population that we're modeling, using as inputs the distributions of the multidimensional distributions of the population characteristics, that is income by location, by household size, by vehicle ownership, and so on. So the bits I'm going to focus on, as I mentioned already, are the activity synthesizer and the demand simulator. The activity generation model, or the activity synthesizer, the activity generation model is the one that feeds into the activity synthesizer. And what we're doing is we're developing in-home, out-of-home activity generation models using the time use survey data in the UK, which is one of the few data sources that actually has simultaneous information from individuals about what they do in home or in building, to be more general, and out of home or out of building. And therefore we use that data, we calibrate econometric models based on random utility maximization principles, and estimate the basket of activities, or calibrate a model that can predict the basket of activities that an individual will undertake over a given day. These are obviously stochastic models, so there's a probability with which a basket of activities will be undertaken. And by doing so, we capture the trade-offs between virtual and physical activities. So the basket of activities that I mentioned would include working virtually, and that virtual working could be on a laptop, on a tablet, on a phone, can be undertaken in home while you're traveling or in some location like a coffee shop away from your office location. So that would be a virtual activity. There are physical activities when you're at your workplace and working. And that trade-off between virtual and physical activities for work, for social activities, for leisure, for shopping, and so on, is captured as a function of the transport system characteristics, the personal context or the personal characteristics, household characteristics, the building, the home characteristics, the building attributes, how the size of the home, the type of home, the appliances, the energy system characteristics such as the tariff, the EV charging infrastructure, and so on, and other contextual factors such as seasonality and weather. The second model that I mentioned, which is the synthesizer, is the one that actually predicts energy demand as a function of the activities undertaken in home. In this case, at the moment, we're focusing more on in-home activities, but broadly, it's in-building, I guess, activities. And this energy demand, the idea of this model is that energy demand is closely linked to activities, should be modeled together, and the intensity of energy consumption can be a function, as I mentioned earlier, of a wide range of characteristics. So we're developing a methodology to characterize this energy demand by taking the activities simultaneously into account with the energy involved. So this is energy consumed. So this is developed using, at the moment, a Tobit type model, basically. And I think with that, I summarize. This is the link to the IDLES project. There's a lot more about the IDLES project there.